Hi, and good morning everyone, and welcome to this Q Associates live event. My name is Jerry Allen, and I'm the head of the Modern Workspace practice here at Q Associates. Here at Q Associates, we're trying to run a series of live events at the moment, focusing on those technologies and solutions which are most appropriate to the current crisis situation and the inevitability of most people working remotely from their office address. So today's live event is on desktop virtualization. The format of the event is that I'll be presenting for about 15 minutes or so. I have opened up the Q&A window, so please post questions as we go through the event this morning, and I'll do my best to answer those as we go along. So what do we mean by desktop virtualization? I suppose in its simplest form, it's the ability to run a desktop workload on a remote server, a server remote from the client device, and then to use a client device. Where we're showing it as a thin client device here, but in reality it can be any end user compute device, laptop, desktop, tablet, and then some sort of connection infrastructure to facilitate the connection of that end user device through to the remote desktop. Running on the remote server. So I've got a question already on that, so let me just have a look. So can we run this on a Mac operating system? So typically what we're talking about here is the actual desktop, the virtual desktop that we're running is going to be a Windows environment, these days Windows 10, or a shared session on a Windows Server environment. But in terms of the end user compute device, yes, that can be a Mac device, that can be a Mac laptop or desktop, as long as we're using remote desktop technology where the client can be installed on a Mac environment, and most of them can, then yes, you can use the Mac as the end user device. There's no problems with that at all. So I guess the first decision most organisations have to make is to look at the choices between having a managed EUC device or a virtual desktop infrastructure, or a combination of both. Many of our clients have actually got Windows 10 laptops for most of their employees. Those Windows 10 laptops are well managed using something like Microsoft Intune or SSCM, or similar command and control technology. And then in this environment where staff have to go home, they just take the laptop with them, usually connect to the corporate network over a VPN type solution, and then continue to use the laptop as if they were in the office. And that's perfectly fine. That's working for a number of clients, and there's no major challenges with that. Where clients are more challenged is when their employee profile is such that they don't have all have corporate laptops. It's in these scenarios where the virtual desktop environment is more applicable. So a couple of examples, so maybe students in an academic environment, so the students aren't issued with corporate or academic institution owned laptops. They're using what we call BYOD, or bring your own device laptops or tablets. So in those sorts of scenarios, virtual desktop is a much more appropriate solution. Another example, I've got a customer, a market research company at the moment that's rolling out a virtual desktop environment. When they win a project to do some market research, they have to engage with a number of subcontractors or freelancers just to deliver on the market research for that particular project. And then once the project is complete, those employees or freelancers go back to working for other organisations. So in those sorts of environment, where you've got a seasonal or an ebb and flow to the number of employees, then a virtual desktop infrastructure can be a very compelling delivery model. So I've got another question coming in already, so thanks for that. Let me have a look at this one. So somebody's asking how the security of a virtual desktop infrastructure compares to the security of a laptop. So that's a really good question. I mean, I would say we can secure both of them, and both should be very secure. So with the laptop, the managed laptop device, we'd have as I said, an Intune or SSCM agent running on each of those laptops, and that would ensure that the security posture of that laptop, so all its antivirus, its Windows updates, and everything else was compliant before it was allowed to join the network, or before it was allowed to access any data from the network at least. With the VDI solution, or the virtual desktop solution, there's not as much need to worry about the posture of the end user device, because there's a natural air gap between the end user device and the virtual desktop environment, which is running in your data center typically. So both can be very secure. I think the key difference is that you're not as worried about the end user device. You know, if that gets compromised, that doesn't compromise your network or your server infrastructure in the virtual desktop scenario. So here at Q Associates, we work with 3 vendors in this space. We work with VMware with their Horizon product. We work with Citrix with their Zen Desktop product. And we also work with Microsoft. Historically, Microsoft has been with their Remote Desktop Services product, which is a shared server session solution. But Microsoft have released a different solution, which I'll come to later in this presentation. So it's an interesting new offering from Microsoft to look at as well. So traditionally, most virtual desktop environments have been deployed into your on-premise data centers, where the server infrastructure that supports the desktops is deployed to your data center. And there'll usually be 2 deployments to cater for the BCDR scenario. So you'll have a primary data center and a secondary data center. Then you'll have the end user compute devices, and then all of the shared infrastructure, the connection and security brokering infrastructure in between. In this scenario, the command and control software, whether it's VMware or Citrix, will be your responsibility. So there'll be a requirement occasionally to patch and update that command and control software. But more recently, obviously, with the trend to move many IT workloads into the public cloud, the virtual desktop is no different from this. So what we're showing here is an example of deploying a VMware Horizon Cloud solution using Microsoft Azure as the back-end compute infrastructure. So what we're showing here is, number one is the actual Microsoft Azure infrastructure as a service to provide the actual compute capacity and the storage capacity for the actual virtual desktops. Then we actually have the VMware Horizon Cloud offering. The key difference here is that this is now a software as a service offering. So rather than you having to manage and patch the actual command and control software, that's all taken care of by VMware themselves. Then we have that middle layer of deployment and connectivity. So what we normally do here is extend the Active Directory infrastructure into your Azure subscription or Azure tenant. So that's typically done with a site-to-site VPN between your on-premise network and the Azure subnet or VNet. And then some Active Directory domain controllers can be deployed into that Azure tenant to extend the Active Directory. Then we've got the connection and security and load balancing infrastructure in the middle here. The nice thing about VMware is that VMware will actually deploy that infrastructure for you using their own templates. So what we do is we just give VMware a service principal into your Azure tenancy, and then they can deploy as a pod. They can deploy all that shared infrastructure for the load balancing and for the security. And then 5 and 6 over here, we actually have the actual virtual desktops or shared VDI environments as required for the end user compute piece. So the first question we usually get is, how much does this all cost? So again, using the same example, VMware Horizon Cloud with Azure as the compute infrastructure. What we're showing here is list pricing from both VMware and Azure. So obviously better pricing can be achieved depending on your sector and licensing relationship with these two vendors. But what this example is showing is a 500 user deployment of Horizon Cloud. And that comes out on terms of VMware licensing cost at £13, just over £13 per user. And then coincidentally, on this particular example, the end user compute cost, the infrastructure cost in Azure is also about £13, so a total cost of just over £26. This does assume that you already have a Windows 10 license. So most customers these days have their Windows 10 license within their overall Microsoft 365 subscription. So if you have that, that covers the Windows 10 side. And this is also based on a 12-month commit. So if you want to commit for 3 years, for example, then this would bring the price down to about £22. Or if you want pay-as-you-go, then that would push the price up a little bit. But that's the 12-month commit pricing. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was that there is a new offering from Microsoft now, the Windows Virtual Desktop offering, completely Azure based, launched in public release late last year. So the key differences here are this is now a multi-session Windows 10 deployment. So it's the only multi-session Windows 10 deployment available. And it's also highly optimized for Office 365. Many of us will be aware that when you deploy Outlook and other Office 365 client programs into a shared environment, we then have the challenge of managing the profiles and the Outlook cached files, etc. So this solution addresses those challenges very well. At the moment, it's a bit less mature, so it's not as good on the command and control side. So all of the deployment and management of this solution is just through PowerShell commands and scripts at the moment, although we are expecting that to be built into the Azure GUI, the admin portals within Azure, in the not too distant future. But the other key benefit of this solution is the cost. There's two areas where this is significantly cost effective. First of all, there's no charge for the actual command and control. So you're only paying for the Azure IaaS, infrastructure as a service, compute and storage that's required to actually deploy the Windows 10 desktops. And as I said earlier, it's a shared session on those Windows 10 desktops. So if we think back to the VMware cost where we were talking about £13 for the licensing, there's none of that. And then the £13 for the infrastructure cost, that can be shared typically between about 6 to 8 users. So we could be looking at an overall cost per user of somewhere in the region of £2 to £5 per month. So significantly cheaper than the VMware or the Citrix offerings. Some more questions coming in, so thanks for the questions. Speed of deployment is one question. How long does it take to deploy this? Well, with all of these public cloud-based solutions, so if we go back to the VMware one, all of this can be deployed. The VMware Horizon piece is a SaaS offering, and all of the infrastructure to support this is deployed into your Microsoft Azure tenant. So we can deploy a proof of concept typically within a couple of working days to get a proof of concept up and running, and even a production environment probably within a few more days after that. No procurement of hardware required, so very quick time to deploy. Somebody else is asking, how do the licensing costs compare for VDI versus the managed laptop solution? So that's a really good question. So as we said, with the managed laptop, we were typically looking for an end user license for some sort of management software, whether it's Intune or SSCCM. So that will be normally lower cost than, say, a VMware license, a Horizon license, or a Citrix license. So there's a bit of saving on the licensing cost there potentially. But to offset that, you've also got to think about the device costs. So in a VDI environment, the device will be a much lower spec typically, or it'll even be the employee's device or the student's device. Whereas with the managed EUC device, we're typically looking for much higher spec devices, and the life cycle to replace them will normally be a lot tighter as well. So maybe 2 to 3 years on a managed laptop, a managed corporate laptop, compared to 5 to 7 years for the end user device for a VDI environment. How does Citrix compare to VMware? So again, that's a really good question. So they're broadly the same, making the same offerings and very similar price. What we tend to see anecdotally is Citrix's heritage comes from more of a multi-session server environment. So we see that much more where the customer's looking for that multi-session server environment or even an app virtualization solution. Whereas VMware, we see that anecdotally much more in where the requirement is for a full desktop environment. So if you need a full Windows 10 desktop environment virtualized, then we tend to see VMware more in that space. But they both have offerings in both spaces. So the honest answer is that they are actually very similar. We just see that slight different emphasis. So let me just check to see if we've got any other questions. We've got, if you're using VMware, do you need an RDS license and an RDS server farm? Well, again, depends on which sort of solution you're going for. As I was saying there, we typically see VMware deployed where the requirement is for a full virtual desktop. So in that scenario, it's the Windows 10 license that we're looking for rather than RDS licenses. Again, you can run it as a multi-session server offering, and in that scenario, yes, you would need some sort of RDS license or terminal server license. Another question that we've got here: are there any notable performance differences between the three solutions? Would one be recommended over the other? No, again, if they're deployed correctly and built correctly, I don't see that there'd be any performance difference. I mean, they all will rely on an end-to-end connection. One of the differences, I think I didn't call it out, but it was on one of the earlier slides, is obviously the corporate laptop is the only one that can work completely offline. So if your employees, maybe some mobile sales resources, I mean, not applicable in the current environment, obviously, but when we get back to normal working, those mobile users that are very mobile, they'll want the offline working, so they'll want the corporate managed laptop solution. The VDI solution needs obviously an internet connection back to the data center or back to the public cloud, depending on which deployment option you've gone for. So once all that's in place, no noticeable difference in performance. They're all more than capable of delivering the performance that your employees need. So some good questions there, and I've done my best to answer those through the event as best as possible. But if you do have any further questions or anything else that you want to discuss around this solution or technology, then please do address them to this email address here, remote.working@coassociates.co.uk, and we can either arrange a follow-up session or just an email dialogue to address those questions. But we'd be very pleased to take any questions at all or any inquiries on this subject or any other for that matter that's applicable to this current environment. So please do get in touch. And once again, thanks for listening today. Hope you found that useful, and we look forward to seeing you at the next live event soon. So many thanks, and bye for now.